Hello, hello, hello. I hear music. It's so soothing. Is that from Twitter or is that your music?
That's Twitter.
Wow, I like it. Good, nice touch there, guys.
In the settings, you can actually choose. There are 4 different kinds of music, and you can.
Nice. Oh, very cool.
This is your
I am glad.
first Spaces, right? Officially?
This is my very first spaces, and I've invited a few friends to see if anybody joins. Like
Oh, yay!
literally, like at 3:30. So I don't know how many will even make it, but hey, at least they're aware.
All right. I
Mm.
also sent a bunch of invites, so we'll see. It doesn't, I mean, the nice thing is since it's recorded, everybody can
It's
listen to
there.
it kind of,
Yes.
listen on their own
Yeah.
schedule. Yeah.
I've been wanting to jump back into Twitter ever since Elon took over and things became more free. Um, so I'm excited. Yeah.
Yay. Well, as you know, I'm a huge fan. And so I'm thrilled to be able to do this with you. And I have always admired kind of your take. I mean, we'll do the intros in a second, probably, but I,
Cool.
I love the heart that you bring to this conversation, and I love the soul that you so clearly care about supporting people's soul and the
Yeah.
soul of our country and the soul of, at the heart of everything that we're going through, there are people, and
Yeah.
your
I
care.
I appreciate you saying that. It's just a natural compulsion, really, at this point. I mean, it's
Mm,
seeing so much go down in the world and feeling that increasing sense of division.
yeah,
Um, it's been extremely disconcerting, and just to be able to speak to that
yeah,
and start to face it together
yeah,
feels heartening and uplifting and consoling and healing. So
yeah,
I'm very excited to be a part of, in any way that I can to help offer that invitation, into this approach, this orientation to reality and,
yeah,
those with whom we have disagreements. So yeah,
yeah. Especially since
it feels right.
we have our individual devices, and some of us are separated from other people that don't share the same, we're surrounded by folks who don't think the way we think, or we have a family that isn't into, like you and I have talked about the wisdom traditions or integral theory, or, we may be around a community of people who just don't share our sensibilities. And so, like you said, coming together and being able to have this conversation together is so heartening, so comforting.
It is, and I think that people are hungry for that. I think we've been missing that interest in coming to compromise and conciliation and trying to understand and figure things out together. I
Yeah.
think one of the blocks against that has been, and this is a natural response, but the sense of certainty that can take us over can really close us off from those around us and from new information. And if we're going to come up with any kind of compromise and solutions that are going to put us on a road towards peace, what we have to, kind of drop the ego a little bit. And so it's an invitation to open the heart
Yeah.
and to open the dialogue once again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's go ahead and crack the nut. We're
Let's do it.
the title for today is Catalyst: Culture, Chaos, and all the Aquarian consciousness sheet. There's a whole bunch of
Yes.
stuff going on, and Chris and I were talking yesterday, and we've got a lot of shared
Hmm.
simpatico about what we can do and how we can think and how we can practice in ways that can push back a little bit on this gray cloud of negativity that I know a lot of people are feeling.
Hmm.
And I know, there are a lot of really touchy topics right now, right? The racism is very,
Everything.
Right. And gender
Yeah.
and country
Oh, sure.
divisions and
Vaccines and wars.
vaccine divisions. And it seems almost as if they are trying to get us to hate each other and divide from each other. I mean, what's the
Doesn't
whole
it?
quote about divide and conquer, right?
Yes,
And so,
absolutely, 100%. It really does feel that way. And go on, I didn't mean to cut you off.
no, it's fine. Yeah. So the whole idea here is to, just share a conversation about, like we said, kind of unraveling the mysteries and discovering the hidden truths and finding some hope and some opportunities for positive change. And kind of
Amen.
peeling back the layers of the illusion, right? Like I love,
Hmm.
Chris, how you talk about the wisdom traditions. Do you want to say a little bit about, like, what does that mean in the wisdom traditions, the illusion versus real life to you? What does that mean to you?
Okay, well, the illusion would be kind of the thought constructs that we build in our minds about reality, just like we have an ego. And we always say, I have an ego, or I have a personality. And who is it that has that is a question for self inquiry. And when you look within and you see, oh, there's the conditioning I've been through, experiences of my life, the TV shows I watched, the music I listened to, the people I was around, all of these things impact our sense of self. And we can become very attached to our ideas about ourselves and our ideas about the world.
Yeah.
And all of those ideas, again, they're mental impressions, these ideas, and they're projections that we're put, just like filters that we're seeing through. And if you remove the filters and you just feel experience just as it is, you find it's quite peaceful. It can even be blissful the deeper you dive into the present moment.
Yeah.
And I think it really helps when we're looking outside of ourselves to let that certainty down as well. We can have, you could say, levels of certainty that we apply to different things, but to keep ourselves from being completely, totally certain gives us room to always upgrade and allowing new information and new ideas and to consider other people's points of view. If we can't put ourselves in other people's shoes, we're not
Yeah.
going to be able to find ways to operate together in this world. So I think when in the ancient spiritual traditions and wisdom traditions, you see that universally,
Yeah.
whether it be Buddhism or Christianity or Advaita Vedanta or Buddhism or whatever.
Yeah.
You find that there's this ultimate realization that we are not, the world is not what we think it is, and we are not what we think we are. The only way to, it seems, to be able to approach that is to drop our so closely held ideas and preferences and expectations and hear anew as though for the first time. Because, we were talking yesterday about value orientations, and maybe I'm shifting ahead a little bit too much
Hmm.
here, but
Hmm.
if we
Well,
can recognize those values that we all come from, then we can understand each other's belief systems and ideas better.
oh yeah, I wish I could just underline and highlight and circle that last thing you just said. Can you repeat that, please?
This is how good my short-term memory is. It's already gone. It's already gone.
Yeah, I
I,
think
I,
what you said was that if we can recognize the underlying values, that can be
yes,
a unifying
yes, thank you.
force.
Yes, these because we all have value orientations that the ideas that we become attached to, they're oriented in some root, and that root is a value orientation. So,
Yeah,
what are the values that people who we disagree with, what are the values they're holding? So we'll find that we can actually relate to those values. We might not
exactly.
agree with their idea of how we should solve a particular problem,
Yeah,
but we can agree on the value orientation
yeah.
behind it.
You know
And,
what
and
we
that
haven't
helps
done?
tremendously. Yeah.
Yeah, it helps. It
Mm,
helps.
mm.
For those of you that are listening that don't know Chris, welcome to Catalyst and the conversation. The Catalyst conversation is a conversation that I started with Lyft, but we'll get back to that. Chris McKinley is a poet. He's a singer for American Dharma. He's a meditator of over 20 plus years. That's a lot of time to kind of be doing this self-reflection about transcending the ego, or at least recognizing the ego and finding a way to integrate it with our higher selves. And most importantly, and one of the things that I'm most excited about is that he's the host of the Actual I. Is that how you pronounce it? Actual I?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
actual I. You got it.
ActualI podcast.
Podcast.
And
Right.
that podcast, he's done amazing conversations. Like if you've ever heard of Wim Hof, a lot of people who are kind of into the consciousness conversation have heard of Wim Hof breathing techniques. And this is another way of kind of reaching the Ubermench, right? The the higher self, of creating the
Yeah.
humanity that we're capable of being, which is
Yes, the
not
Atman, the inner Christ, the inner Buddha, whatever you want to term it. That's it.
right. And that's not only psychologically or spiritually or at a philosophical level, but that's even at the physical level. I mean, Wim Hof has done incredible things like immersing himself in Arctic climate waters for extended periods of time, and he's teaching people his methods. And so
Yes.
on Chris's podcast, you can hear things about the Wim Hof stuff. You can hear more about wisdom sessions and wisdom studies and the traditions that, you know, this is in a sense kind of the old is becoming new again, because there are so many people that are hungry for some sort of clarity, that are hungry for relief, that are just discouraged and overwhelmed by the chaos and looking for something better. And that's what the wisdom traditions are for me too. That's what this catalyst practice is for me. And I love how you're looking at current culture and bringing the wisdom, the ancient wisdom, back into the conversation. It's one of the most, I mean, that in itself is one of the most inspiring and soulful and intelligent conversations that I've ever heard, is with you and the podcast. So how did you?
I appreciate that so much. And I also want to give credit to my new co-host, DJ, we've been doing these weekly meaning making sessions to help address this meaning crisis that we're in. And we've been reviewing John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis lectures live on YouTube, and inviting people to come with us, because it's like a study group. You know, we're not, super wise sages or anything like that, but we are, just your fellow humans here trying to figure this thing out together. And so, yeah, I encourage you guys to check that out. Check out John Vervaeke. But yeah, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to DJ as well, because I would not be able to do what I'm doing right now in the podcast without him.
Aww.
And it's something that I really I'm excited to be doing. I've wanted to share John Vervaeke for some time, but some people might not find interest in that. There's also guided meditations, and as Maya was saying, there's also guided Wim Hof breathing sessions, and there's all kinds of deep dives into the great mysteries of life on the podcast as well. So yeah, thank you for giving a shout out to ActualI. I appreciate that. Yeah.
So
I'm really excited about your work, and as we get deeper into this, I'm really, I'm keen to hear more about Lift and your Catalyst project.
Okay.
As well, because you're doing big things yourself. And I remember when I first met you, and we just hit it off in conversation, because we were following a lot of the same people, and we were interested in the same things. And,
yeah.
I think there's a lot of us out there. We've been afraid to speak up for the last, 3-5 years or so, as things have heated up. But I think it really is time now for us to come out of the woodwork and get out there and start lighting more candles, light more candles and light more candles. And that's really the name of the game right now for me.
Yeah. The origin of Lift years and years ago, I mean, 2 decades worth of work on myself. I like to joke around that I'm my own biggest guinea pig. And I've been, coaching, I think if we include the work that I did with Marshall Rosenberg, we were talking about core values, and that was the first way for me to kind of articulate this sensibility in a way that made sense, that could be shared more easily, was Marshall Rosenberg's work. And he's got a book, I put it in the link list on the Twitter thread, but his original, his book that became the most famous was NVC, Nonviolent Communication. And basically what he calls needs consciousness. Some people have friction with the word need because they don't want to feel needy. But when I integrated that wisdom and working with Marshall, he said that he wanted to bring more of the spirituality into it. And that was kind of my passion working with him, was that I could see how what he was calling needs, I was calling core values. This is, if you've heard of Jungian archetypal work, this striving for self-actualization that we all have. Jung would call those our, needs hierarchy. And that's what Marshall would say is, that behind every action and behind every initiative, no matter how tragic it is, no matter how much we might dislike someone's choices, behind those choices are universal and innocent core values.
Yes.
And so we can recognize this in ourselves, right? Like if I think about something that I maybe have been frustrated with myself about, it's very, very easy for us to look at the innocent motives that are behind our actions, right?
Yes.
And then
that's beautiful. Yeah.
So like whether it's maybe I'm trying to contribute, or there's a kind of love that I'm trying to give to myself or to give to someone else, or maybe I'm doing a particular thing because I want to have an expression of my autonomy, or, I want to be unique and make, like when I here's a classic example of how to translate what we experience in the world into core values. When I see people arguing about gender or sexuality or things like this, I think, every generation we have a teen phenomena where we want to individuate, we want to distinguish ourselves separate from our parents and the generations before. And that's always led to this apparent divide, because some people want things the way they have been, and some people want to take things into a new direction. And there's a core value there for expression and for having our individuality and for feeling unique and feeling like we're contributing something to the world. And so here, if we look at, people choosing gender identities that may be different than what other people believe, but if that can be contentious. But if we look at it as, oh, okay, so the innocent core values behind that, maybe they're looking for their individuality. They're trying to set an identity, right? They're young and they're trying to discover, they're trying to explore, they're trying to experiment. We all have this kind of individual core value for play, right? And exploring. So this is just one example of how Marshall's work has inspired me. And I integrated that along with many other materials and people that I practiced with and my own sensibilities. And that's where Catalyst came from.
That's awesome. Okay. So I really like how you highlighted play and exploring in our individuation process. And I see belonging is in there. And, it just makes me think about how when we are at adolescence, like you're speaking to, we go through an individuation process, and we have to go through an individuation process to learn how to be self-sustainable and to think on our own two feet without others. Exactly. So there's this process that we go through in adolescence where we're pushing everyone away around us. And sometimes it's quite harsh, but that's the process. And understanding that that's where a lot of our identity seeking is coming from, it's really helpful, because then you can look with a compassionate consciousness upon what's happening. And speech is so important. I'm glad we're doing this on Twitter right now, because we have the ability to speak completely openly. And, I'm not partisan to the right or the left. I'm just another human being here trying to figure things out. But I do barely believe that our ability to speak together, it's really the last stop you have before violence.
Yeah.
We have to be able to speak openly.
Yeah.
And so I think that when we're employing compassionate consciousness, then we are able to speak in a way maybe that can reach across some of those walls. Yeah. And that also allows us to understand, those with whom we're trying to build with, we're trying to understand. Yeah. And we kind of see that we're all one here. Yeah. That's another thing that all of the great religions and mystery traditions have told us, that, and it's also, even science points this out for us now. We recognize that there is just this one universe that we dwell in. As far as we know, maybe there's multiverses, but there's even just one of that entire thing that's happening. And we are all extensions of that. We're extensions of this planet. We're Earthlings. Exactly. Yeah. And you hear oftentimes, in recent history, we've been very upset with ourselves as humans for how we've degraded the planet.
Yeah.
And this isn't even a left or right thing. You can look at microplastics in the ocean or degradation of our topsoil,
Yeah.
or the pollution of our rivers and streams, and see that, on both sides, we're not conserving the environment very well.
Right. Right.
And being able to see those kinds of things and recognize, oh wait, I'm a part of this. I'm part of this. I grew out of this earth. I don't have to hate myself. We don't have to call humans a cancer. We
Yeah.
are Earth, and Earth is, you could say, doing this to herself, but it's not quite that either. It's just the evolution process. We're not the end of evolution. We didn't start
Yeah.
out as perfect angels. We're in the midst of the story, and we're writing the story together. And what a beautiful, exciting opportunity. And if we can lift ourselves out of our attachments to our belief systems and our identities, and we can see that this is what we really are at the very bottom of it, then
Yeah.
we realize we get to take part in a great story.
Yeah.
And that's a beautiful, exciting thing. And I really want to invite people into that. We keep, like you were saying, that we get identified with these sides, with teams, with our tribes.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Well, that makes
that's
sense.
natural.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Especially in the face of pain, right? I mean,
Right.
so it
Yeah.
doesn't matter if it's somebody, like you said, polluting a river, or whether it's, farmers that are getting killed in South Africa, or whether it's,
Oof. Yeah. Or India.
it's
Yeah.
the minute you have a loss, whether it's a loss of life or a loss of something that's important to you, maybe your stability or your security, again, those core values, right? If you're feeling a loss on that, that's excruciating. And what do we do with that pain? I mean, one of the things I like to say in my work
Yeah.
is that the human mechanism, there are two paths of pain. I mean, one thing that we can do with pain, and that we often are taught by culture to do with pain, is to figure out who the culprit is, who's the perpetrator, who's the villain. And now that, because we want to stop this thing that's hurting, right?
Yes. Yes. We want to externalize that
Right.
pain.
And so
Yeah.
to stop what hurts, we try to find who to blame. And it introduces right, wrong thinking, blame, shame, guilt. Now you've got punitive justice. And now we're trying to take down the villain. And all of this just leads to, now you've got resentment because there's conflict. And so the two sides are not hearing each other, not getting integrated. The shadow isn't getting integrated, if you understand kind of shadow work. And so it creates increased conflict. And now you've got war. And with war, you've got even more losses and more resentment and more. It just gets worse and worse. That's a downward spiral. And on the other side, and this is what I'm hoping to support more and more people with, I would love to have a whole movement of us supporting people on an upward spiral. And that upward spiral is recognizing that there's something else that we can do when we have pain or frustration or disgust or upset. And that is the first step is to look at these core values and to grieve, to be able to hold, right hand and left hand. On one hand, I can recognize somebody polluting a river, maybe trying to make profit because they're trying to support their family so that they can feel like they're safe, right?
Yes.
And even as I notice myself shift from saying they're polluting the river, and I'm getting angrier and angrier and feeling more and more like crap, excuse the language, but feeling shittier and shittier, right? Instead, if I look at, okay, I don't like what they're doing, and I think that there are probably better choices, but I can understand the innocence behind wanting to support your family and wanting to feel safe. And so that kind of brings compassion and it softens it. But then on the other side, we also have to do with our own individual pain and be able to grieve in a way that heals. And we are not taught by society how to process shadow work, how to process pain, how to grieve in ways that resolve the pain. And so we were talking about the wisdom traditions and the unity, and being able to, for me, core values is a bridge to understanding the divine consciousness within. That when we can actually understand those core values in a felt way, and, we can talk about this later if we want, but there are ways that you can actually experience your own divine consciousness through core values, that I can sit in a session with myself or with clients and draw in, using our imagination, using that subtle creative essence within, that spark of divinity within, we can draw in healing, loving, nurturing support for for pain in a way that resolves grief, often permanently. I mean, for some people, this is, it takes 90 minutes if it's an old trauma or something that's really triggered. It can take longer, or it can take more shadow work. But by doing this healthy core values-based grief work, we can resolve it. And then once we have that kind of expanded inner self that we've connected to the belief, the relief of grieving the pain in a way that resolves it, it opens you up. It splits you wide open. And then we can tap into that open sense to access intuition. And we can say, okay, so now that I'm not carrying unresolved grief, Marshall would say unexpressed pain comes out as violence, or is often interpreted as violence. So if we have
or
a way,
it's turned internally and it turns into addictions for us.
Or addictions, or
unhealthy habits.
Unhealthy habits, exactly. And so once we've actually resolved that, and there are ways to tell if it's resolved or not resolved. Once we've resolved it and it splits us open, we've got that open space where we're connected to the infinite divine within, where we're connected to that expanded space, that spark of the divinity within. Then it's very easy to say, okay, let me listen inward to that intuition. What requests do I have of myself or others about this core value that I have? So I really value the environment. I really don't want people contaminating rivers, but I also want to integrate that they want to support their family. So now we can have concrete, divinely inspired right action by asking the question, what requests do I have of myself or others that integrates both my desire to protect our environment and also their desire to feed their family,
Yeah.
So this is how we come to win-win solutions. And that process, I think, is potentially one of many. I mean, there are a lot of different people coming out now with their own answers for what can we do to kind of bring hope and bring relief and bring positive wisdom back into the global conversation, because this is not, you tell me your opinion, but my opinion is it's not just individuals and countries that are fighting with each other. I think that this is a cosmic kind of, whether you want to call it the Aquarian Age, or whether you want to call it the shift from Kali Yuga to the next golden age.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
That this is the nature of nature, is that it cycles through these dark phases and positive times in time space.
That's a really good point. You'll feel that you were talking about this yesterday too. We feel the pendulum swing, and we're learning a lot from this dark phase that we're moving into right now, that we've been in, you could say, for the last few or more years.
Yeah.
I think everyone's felt it for the last 3 to 5 years or so, just kind of increasing that sense of fragmentation and dissolution and breakdown and division.
Yeah.
And I love that you put your finger on the win-win, and that this is ultimately it's a spiritual movement.
Yeah.
As well, we've lost touch with a sense of the sacred, and it doesn't matter what religion one follows. I feel all the great religions speak to love as the supreme unifying principle, as the principle of life, as Martin Luther King put it.
Yeah.
And I think that what you're suggesting here, it sounds to me like an orientation of love towards the world outside and ourselves within.
Yeah.
And by employing this orientation, it's a posture, it's a stance that we can take, through which we may recognize one another's core values. We can see through eyes of love, through compassion.
Yeah.
Eyes of love I got from Bill Hicks, if anyone's ever seen that old skit where he talks about the eyes of fear versus the eyes of love. Yeah. It's ingenious.
Yeah. Bill Hicks is
that's really the name of the game. I agree 100%. I think that, how else can, what gives us, let's say, the best chance of making it through this phase with the best aspects of humanity intact? And I think that this is the posture.
Well, how do you answer?
This is the way.
There are inevitably people who just are different personality types, And some are much more connected to their intuition and compassion and love, and some are more practical. And there are people who, because I like to joke around that, the white light of consciousness has come through the prism of reality and created a rainbow of different colors, right? And in those rainbows of different colors, we have different personality types. We've got different preferences. We've all got different, styles and things that we're allergic to or we don't like. And so I've talked to people who've been like, yeah, you're just so romantic and idealistic. You talk love, love, love. So how would you answer someone who is kind of more skeptical or more jaded or just has had more unresolved pain, and they're angry and they're frustrated and they're overwhelmed and they just want to like go take down the villain? Like how would you respond to that color on the rainbow? How would you respond to that part of the population?
That's a really good question. That's really what I've been wrestling with myself for years, is trying to find a way to speak through those kinds of walls.
Yeah. I think that,
I can tell a story that relates to it. Oh, what were you going to say?
No, please go ahead.
Okay. So I was involved in protesting against the war in Iraq. There was this beautiful movement that began before the war even began, and it was and we basically organized the largest protest in world history before the war even began. This had never happened. It took years for the Vietnam War to reach the hundreds of thousands and millions of people coming out. But we had millions of people all over the world in dozens of cities across the planet who organized a protest at the same time to try to stop the war in Iraq. And so, you're talking Seattle to New York to Sydney, Australia to Tokyo, Japan, all over Europe, all over everywhere, in every major city, and even small towns across the states, there was these anti-war protests. I remember reading at some point, of course, we failed to stop the war from starting, and it certainly did go on. And the majority of people in the U.S. supported it right after 9/11 due to the trauma of 9/11. We all bought it, hook, line, and sinker. And of course, Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11, but we bought it. Enough people bought it. So that was a really hard thing to talk about with people. Yeah, it was really hard. And I felt very alone in that time. And I remember one of the successive protests after the war had already begun. And I was writing in my journal. I was trying to figure out, what can I say? What can I do that's going to be helpful? And I came up with the idea to bring a bullhorn and Martin Luther King with me. And Martin Luther King was on a CD in a boombox.
Yeah.
And it was his Beyond Vietnam speech.
Wow.
And so I was thinking about this because I was tired of hearing it come from myself too, because at that time I was quite jaded and oftentimes would say things like, oh, these cops are just pigs, and everyone that is falling for this war are just, stupid sheeple that are just falling for it. And I was upset at the ignorance and I was blameful. And I was falling into the same trap there of not seeing people's value orientations. And so I was thinking so hard about this the night before. This protest, I went with my buddy James, one of the old members of American Dogma, in fact. And I remember thinking the night before as I was writing in my journal, I was like, there's got to be a way. And I was like, well, all of these cops, they're just people.
Yeah.
And why should I be blaming them or anyone else? Because I know that the propaganda, the conditioning is so sophisticated, multi-billion-dollar sophisticated psychological manipulation techniques are being employed. It's nobody's fault that anybody falls for any condition.
Yeah.
And I started to see through eyes of love. I started to see through compassionate consciousness.
Yeah.
And in doing so, I realized, well, gosh, even Dick Cheney and George Bush Jr., how can I love them too?
Yeah.
And I saw, well, they must, people that hoard, people that are greedy, excessively greedy amongst us, like Dick Cheney and Halliburton and those kind of sweetheart deals that they made, and the hundreds of millions or billions that they made off of Iraq. That the weapons proliferators and the weapon military industrial complex all made off of Iraq.
Yeah.
These people must feel empty inside.
Yeah.
They must be so afraid of not having enough that they are hoarding, hoarding, hoarding.
Yeah.
Just like people are hoarding TV shows, right?
Yeah.
And that gave me room to even have compassion for Dick Cheney and George Bush. And so when I went to that protest the next day, I brought that bullhorn and Martin Luther King with me. And this was the 30th anniversary of the 67 protests on the Pentagon. And so 30 years later in 2007, we're repeating this protest. I remember reading along the way that somebody had said, we got to stop calling it anti-war and start calling ourselves pro-peace. And it
Yeah.
was that shift that helped me the night before, writing in my journal, figure out a way that I might be able to approach this situation. So that's what inspired me to bring Martin Luther King with me. So back to the protest, we're at the hill now. There's a hill that overlooks the Pentagon where everyone had gathered. There's hundreds of people on top of this hill. Suddenly, over the crest of the hill appears a line of about 50 riot cops, wide enough to span the extent of the hill. They start marching forward, and everybody leaves the hill except for this one couple on their picnic blanket. And I walked past them, and I knelt down in front of these police officers, most of whom were black because this is DC. And I knew that the night before. I was like, I should bring Martin Luther King with me. We need the cops on our side. If there's going to be any kind of positive revolution or end to this war, we need the police on our side. We can't see them as our enemy. We need everyone we can get. And so that was the intention that I came with. So I knelt down, I put that boombox down, turned it on, pressed play, and put the bullhorn in front of it. And Martin's speech, this is the most powerful speech I've ever heard in my life. And I encourage everyone to look it up, Beyond Vietnam by Martin Luther King. You can read it. So you might be able to find a little snippet or two of it on YouTube. There's an old version I found that had the speech put to music by Peter Gabriel. That was just tremendous. And that's the version that I was playing for these police officers. While I was playing it, the captain was, you can tell, kind of like trying to make fun of me and talking into the ears of his officers as they stood there. And they were kind of awkward with what he was saying, and I could tell. And I could tell that Martin was reaching them. And then a very tall, big linebacker, like size, like 6 foot plus, 250 pounds plus black guy starts walking in between me and the police like a sentry, showing them that he was going to guard me if they came forward.
Wow.
And it's just, tears started just pouring out of my eyes.
Wow.
And I just sat there, and this is a 40-minute speech. And these cops, instead of like clearing the hill like they were commanded to multiple times, they stood there and listened. And finally, the captain was able to get them to start moving forward. And they stepped slowly and tentatively. They weren't banging their batons on their shields like they were initially. They were just very slowly giving me all the room and the time in the world to walk backwards. I picked up the boombox. I kept the speech playing for the last few minutes, and it finished while I was walking backwards off that hill. And they finished clearing the picnic couple and myself off that hill. I think the picnic couple had left a while before anyway. So they finished clearing the hill. All that was left was me and Martin. And so I don't know if that story gives much of an answer to people, but that at least is a way. That's the posture, and I think that's the orientation that we can take as we're trying to speak to our common humanity. And I think maybe that's the way we speak to our common humanity. Say, this hurts me because this is why. And then you name the value orientation behind it.
Yeah.
And then you say, I understand where you're coming from too, and then you can name their value orientation.
I mean, that's the thing,
that
right?
You're recognizing, maybe.
Is that if somebody is bitter, skeptical, angry, frustrated, like coming to the core values is all fine and dandy, but we can't do that if we are in pain. And, one of the people that I love to work with, Daniel Raphael, he says, you have to feel it to heal it. Right. And so it's not just about trying to sweep the anger or the frustration under the carpet. I mean, look at what we perceive at the 3D level, whether you perceive it as illusion or reality, we wake up to it every day, right? Like controlled by bank. And we have another session that we can do on this later in the series.
Yes.
But, whether we're talking of banking, big banking control, or pharma control, or oil, big interests in, or all of the families that control the food and put pollutants and toxins in our foods. So that has created this huge epidemic of diabetics and obesity. And there's so much in our world that leads us to be in pain. If we can't address that, how can we ever find the heart of love? And so I think that it's actually coming together with people who can see the core values that can help hold the container for that anger and frustration to vent and to have its voice. The only way we can transform or alchemize or transmute that pain into something higher is to have it heard, is to bring it forward. I mean, part of what I love about your work in mystery traditions is this, hermetic concept of alchemy. And what I love this catalyst is a kind of, it's not the only one, certainly, but it's a kind of hermetic, emotional transmutation. It's a kind of alchemy.
Yes.
And it's, when we're talking about love, like the alchemists might say that all things are made up of vibrational energy dynamics, right? The physicists say that too. Or, if you look at subatomic particles, right? Like all we know is that everything's vibrating. Beyond that, what did Descartes say? I think, therefore I am. And thoughts have brain waves, right? There's all this vibration. And there are different kinds of vibrations, right? Like the busy mind is beta frequency of vibrations. And then when we're in that kind of dream state or in ecstasy or bliss state, we're more in theta brainwave states. And that creative essence, that place of intuition, that's in theta. So we can't just be in beta brain of tasks and logistics and anger and pain. We can't be in beta brain and feel that love. We've got to have care for that in a way that alchemizes it. It's a kind of, if I think about it, if chakras, right? And survival or, anger that might live in our root, right? And when we're bringing that energy through our awareness and understanding the core values, that's kind of bringing it to the heart of the matter. And
very
that
much so
helps raise that consciousness to a place where we can have the relief. And we might later in the series do exercises and practices where you can actually feel this. But
I love that idea. That's a great idea.
You can see the connection there between the pain. All core values are a face of love, fundamentally.
I feel that, and I posted something on the Instagram recently, which I think you might have seen, which all is love and the symptoms of the lack thereof. And I picked that up. That's just me putting it into my own words, but I heard a teacher named Adyashanti that teaches from the Buddhist and Advaita Vedanta tradition. And he spoke of something along those lines, and it feels true that there really is nothing but love. There's the synchrony that you find in the spinning of the vibration of atoms, and there's synchrony in ourselves when we are able to rise into our higher states of consciousness. Like you're saying, when we're in a beta mode, we're very much kind of in a fear-driven mode where we're separating ourselves from everything else. We're just seeking survival. We're afraid, we're frustrated, we're hurt, and we're walling up. And I think, and you talked about transmutation, and I think that's so key, that we can take the shit of life and turn it into something beautiful. And that is all of the world's great art. I love that humans have this capacity that we can take something miserable and find insight from it and then make something beautiful from it, whether it be a poem or a painting or a song that speaks to people. It consoles, it speaks for other people's pain, and it also helps us rise above it and find that there's a beauty even in our sadness. We can create beauty from our sadness and from even our hopelessness and our misery. I hear a doggy barking. What happened to the doggy?
Sorry, he just saw somebody walking across the window, so he got excited. Yeah,
Oh,
I you're talking about, that kind of darkness and being able to alchemize it, transmute it. I mean, what is Rumi, the poet Rumi says, if
Rumi, yeah.
everything around you seems dark, look again, you may be the light.
Mm,
And I think that
mm,
we can't fix a problem at the level it was created. I mean, we have this 3D
that's it.
awareness of our needs and our preferences, but there's always going to be change. There's always going to be loss. That's part of nature, right? And
Yeah.
at a certain level, I think that coming into the Aquarian Age, coming into this new awakening, the new dimension of being, or actually being able to make a difference where while the planet is going through enormous changes, I think that
Mm,
that's going to depend on us awakening our higher selves, awakening our inner divinity, and awakening beyond the illusion of those preferences to a place where we can actually recognize the preferences as a face of creation manifesting itself on earth, or trying to manifest itself on earth as it is in heaven. I mean, really what those core values are is their ideals, right? So
yeah.
if we have an ideal for efficiency, we might create machines, and then some people will be in pain because they'll say, oh, we just lost our jobs because of those machines. But there's an
Mm,
ideal behind that sweet yearning for simplicity, for less work, to be able to have
mm,
less effort, to be able to have more time with our families and enjoy our lives more, right? There's a
mm,
sweet vision there. And
yes.
the ancient philosophers used to talk about the realm of forms, the realm of ideals, right? Like our imagination is capable of
Yeah.
seeing these beautiful worlds. And then if we're saying, well, that's all fine and dandy, but I just lost my job, so how am I going to feed my family? That too is that yearning. It's the love that says, hold on, I care about my
Mm,
family thriving, and I want to be able to
yes.
contribute. It's important for me as a
Yes.
man, or as a family member, or as a, breadwinner. I want to be able to
Yes.
contribute, and that gives me a sense of purpose. And
And we can understand that person because we say, oh, that's the core value of compassion.
right.
I can relate to compassion.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And if we look at that, I mean,
Hmm.
aren't those values universal? Who
They
doesn't
are. I'm
have
looking at them right now. Who doesn't have
right?
the five core values: compassion, or accountability, and interest in accountability? We don't like it when people are corrupt or people
Well,
lie
we
to us,
want we want
or they don't follow
we want
through.
to not have that
Yeah.
pain, right? We want accountability as a strategy for relief. We want
Yes.
resolution. We want
We want healthy
we
competition,
want
right?
our yeah, we
Resolution.
want
Yes.
our concerns integrated into the conversation.
That's right.
And so
That's
sometimes
right.
some values are strategies for other values. And all of this is kind of still in the 3D. It's still in the ego. It's still in the body of preferences and desires and yearnings. And if we can clear the mud from the windshield, imagine that we are a vehicle and that there is a kind of inner divinity that has this capacity to envision these ideals, that has this capacity to envision these perfect scenarios. That is our divine light. That's our spark of creative grace within, or the spark of God within, if you're a Christian.
That's when we're in communion, when we're in a reciprocal relation with the whole of reality,
Exactly.
and when what you're speaking to there in the spiritual sense, and this is for all the non-theists or agnostics
Mm-hmm.
out there. Um, we are presently tracking through cognitive science and neuroscience that there are indeed higher states of consciousness that human beings can achieve. So what they were speaking of in ancient Christianity or Buddhism, of enlightenment, of our of our oneness, of the kingdom of heaven being within, all of that is
Yeah.
true. It
Yeah.
is true. Now there might be different interpretations of that. Human beings have been reaching for eons to have a relationship with the ineffable, with the unknowable, with this great mystery that we dwell
Mm-hmm.
within. And there's a lot of cultural baggage that comes with some of the traditions. But at the heart of all of these traditions, you can find that they have these singular agreed upon truths, and they are nested within those core values that you're pointing out.
Well,
These core values of interest and compassion, accountability, honesty, freedom,
yeah,
trust,
yeah.
modesty, growth and wellness, and equality, and things that we can all
And you
agree
can
on.
feel the light tending when we're going from a place of frustration to a place of looking at those core values, right? Like if we're
Mm-hmm.
saying, okay, I'm pissed off and angry because I just lost my job, that feels really heavy, and we can feel powerless and we can feel angry and frustrated. And then when we connect, it's, we can't really take effective action when we're angry. We can be
That's
destructive,
right.
but we can't really take effective
Oh yeah,
action.
we all know that advice. Like, don't make a decision when you're upset, when you're angry.
Exactly.
It's very good
Exactly.
advice.
But if you
Yeah.
take just 30 seconds to breathe into the belly and then say, okay, well, what's the ideal that I want here? And the reason that I'm angry and the reason that I'm upset is because I have this love for my family that I'm trying to express.
Mm,
Or the reason I'm angry is
yes.
because I don't want to feel powerless. The ideal, the thing that I'm yearning for is I want to be able to feel powerful. I want to have clarity about what to do now that things are changing. It's scary to have change.
Yes.
And I want to be able to feel, I want my direction. I want my purpose. So, and you can,
Yes. Especially with change as fast as what we're currently
yeah,
experiencing. It can be quite overwhelming,
yeah,
and I'm sure I've been reeling from this thing, and you're right. It's these kinds of practices like breathing and mindfulness practices of meditation and things. I'm excited that we're going to be sharing different methodologies to employ
yeah,
because these are so instrumental in bringing us back home and centered within that interconnected sense of self. Because that interconnected sense of self is so beautifully
yeah,
gratifying and enlivening and vivifying. And that's what we've all been missing.
yeah,
We're in a time of such sense of meaninglessness. It's no wonder that nihilism is growing, that hopelessness is
yeah,
rampant. And we ourselves, this brings me back to when I was speaking on the war in Iraq. The greatest change comes from within ourselves. Any revolution, say we had a revolution during that war, the very next day, all of everything that we had thought that we had ended it by instilling and putting new people in
yeah,
power. I think that corruption would have taken all over again and even more effectively because the powers that be would have learned from their mistakes. And it really, the greatest, truest revolution, most long lasting, I think, will come from within each one of us.
yeah,
And by changing ourselves, we change the world. And that old
yeah,
adage, if you want to change the world, you must change yourself, has been ringing louder and louder and louder in my head for the past 20
yeah.
years. And I really feel that is at the core of it. And it seems like a long game, but here we are in the age of the internet talking on Twitter
Mm-hmm.
spaces about this. And, it only takes one person to go on and share these
Yeah,
ideas and them to share it with somebody
yeah,
else for it to really ripple out. And we could be touching tens of thousands, millions of people right now without even
yeah,
knowing it. And that's what everybody has that power. Everybody has the power to butterfly effect, ripple out something beautiful. I truly believe that a smile saves the world. And in fact, I think every day it's happening that we are reeling ourselves back from the brink. It's some lady behind a grocery store counter somewhere that has a genuine smile and greeting for everyone that comes through her
yeah,
line that impresses upon the people around her. And some guy that just had a horrible day working construction. He's just got himself a case of beer. He's going to go home and he's going to sit there in front of the TV and watch the game and just
yeah,
disconnect and just try and relax. Well, sometimes maybe that guy's kid or his wife comes in while he's watching the game and he gets upset with him typically.
yeah,
But on this day, because of that woman's smile and that genuine greeting, he was feeling a little bit more chipper, you could say. And maybe after two beers, his kid comes in and asks, "Hey, Dad, you want to throw the ball?" And Dad's actually like, "You know what? Yeah, I'm going to teach you how to throw like this pitcher here. Yeah, let's go outside." And then he becomes, again, involved with his son, and that kid doesn't become the next school shooter. And that is, I really truly believe that these things happen every day. And I think that that's the power that we all have when we change from within, even the slightest bit. It helps save the world.
Well, you've heard of the book Spiral Dynamics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So,
Who was that now?
Don Beck and Chris Cowan. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name right, Cowan, but it was pretty popular in the early 2000s, and basically, it, for those who don't know it, it just talks about how different values are evident in different demographics and evident in different time periods in history. So, for example, and then he gives them colors and talks about how they connect linearly one to the next as a progression through human development or through time. And of course, this is not just the only perspective. There are, for as many human beings as there are on the face of the earth, there are different perspectives on how things work, right? And how humans develop and how we come to where we are. But one of the things they talk about is first tier and second tier development. And first tier development, just super briefly, might be described as going from, survival to personal accomplishment to, having more harmony and care for our planet to kind of awakening to that inner spark. And then the second tier is where we start to recognize, everybody else on the rainbow, I'm blue, so I don't like red, or I'm red, so I don't like blue. On the rainbow infighting, there's a leap that happens where all of a sudden we start to recognize, everything has its pros and cons. And that if we can look at the gold in each of the different things that we disagree with, and we can pool all the gold together, that's what's called integral or integrated consciousness. And I used to have a coach certification school that I called the integrated approach that included this, that was integrally informed. But the idea here is that I think that that what we're dealing with on our planet is planetary because it's a shift of consciousness, that we're not just going through a culture war. We're not going through divisions of, we're actually going through the growing pains of what it is to go from ego consciousness to awakening to, holy cats, there's something deeper within. There's something that...
Wow, that was... Yes.
that we have something much wider and broader that we can access if we know how. And media does not teach us how, and culture doesn't teach us how, schools don't teach us how. And this is what the 4 pieces of Catalyst are for. And I'm hoping that folks will come back and we'll go through the different pieces. The first piece, that's, the core values is kind of the first piece of that. And this is, coming into our higher selves. We can think of that as a new thing. We can think of that as a piece of new development on this linear progression from Ooga Booga to, the Bronze Age through to the modern era. But in fact, there are many people who believe that there were ancient cultures, pre-Sumerian cultures, who had this wisdom, that had technology that's much more advanced than what we have today, and that were dogging to try to maintain this wisdom of how to cultivate that expanded Ubermench, that expanded inner divinity, that higher self aspect. And I think that that's what's happening again, is that ultimately, if we're deluded into believing that the only thing that's real is what we can see and touch, we are divided from 2/3 of ourselves. That there's an enormous interior, that there's enormous power beyond the physical that people aren't guided to learn how to access. And I think that that's what's coming into awakening right now. I think that that's what's going to be the beginning of the next golden age. I think that's consistent with going from the age of Pisces to the age of Aquarius. And I'm super grateful for your company in this journey. Like you said, like, even if one person is positively, has their life uplifted, something changes for the positive because of a shift of, even if one of those people are just us, like, it's all worthwhile.
Yes.
Even if it's just one ripple on the water can cascade out in unexpected, unimaginable ways.
Brilliantly brilliantly put. That so inspired me. And you named it right as I was thinking it. It could even be one of us
It could even be
ourselves,
just us,
you know.
right?
And I feel that constant. You know, I love that enlightenment has no cap.
Yeah.
It's an infinite process, and I like that because there's infinite room to grow.
Yeah.
You know, you're never going to get to the end of being better. There's infinite room for you to improve. And how exciting a prospect that is when you shift into this perspective of it. I love the way you just described spiral dynamics. I've been turned on to it a little bit through watching Rebel Wisdom and studying integral theory a little bit. Um, but that golden thread is it. That is the way for us. And how heartening, how encouraging is that to hear?
I mean,
I'm so moved by that, and that there is a way for us to move forward. There is a way for us to acclimate to this current reality, and even be excited that yes, we're going through this pendulum swing for a reason. Because just like adolescence, sometimes you have to make the mistake to really learn it deep as to why you shouldn't ever do that thing again, and why you even fell victim to it in the first place. All of that little nitty gritty detail you get to pick up when you make a mistake and you learn from it. And that's what our species is doing right now. We're just testing the boundaries like little kids do when they're dropping and throwing things and figuring out the physics of different objects and how the parents react when they play with them in different ways. We're just figuring out how we can move through this reality. And you're right, you know, that pre-Sumerian, the emerald tablets, you know, and the Egyptians were onto something. We have little clues that are left, yet the teachings are indestructible, it seems.
Yeah.
And no matter what you do, you can't get rid of the insight that love is the highest, and that everything seems to be nothing but love. When the closer you get to an experiential contact with reality, the more that we come home within ourselves and we feel the intrinsic interconnected oneness of this reality that we all are so graced to be a part of, the more you realize that this is all just a beautiful, beautiful play that we're putting on together to perfect the art of love. And what an exciting game that we get to be a part of.
Yeah, I love you're talking about direct experience. The difference between the dogma of just saying it's all love and the actual direct experience of what the heck does that mean is experiencing
There's a big difference.
Right.
You can intellectualize how meditation or prayer or contact with the source is for years before you even get an experiential taste for it. And that's okay, because the experiential taste of it is actually infinitely familiar. Once you touch on it, you're like, oh, that's right. I already knew this. I always knew this. I just forgot that I knew this.
Yeah.
And it is such a consolation when you come into contact with that. It's like we forget to ask that question. What are we all doing here? What is a cosmos? What is a universe?
Yeah.
How is it that the universe lights or this planet lights?
Yeah.
And what are we all doing here? You know, what's the higher reason? Is there a higher reason? Well, you can find out, and you can have that experience that they talked about in all of these different variant wisdom traditions throughout time. Somehow they all agree on this experience of oneness and infinite love that we can experience. And I do verily believe that that's what's at the bottom. And you can call it what you want. You know, it doesn't have to be an old bearded judgmental guy in the sky. It could be something that we call God or the generative, omnipresent, divine source.
Yeah, Alan Watts used to make jokes that, you know, if you are not enjoying your problems, you're kind of missing the point. And what that means.
Dig it.
What?
I said dig it. Yeah. Yeah, I love Watts.
Part of what that means for me is that recognizing, like, when I can clear the mud from the windshield of my own perspective, right? When I can feel the shift into core values focus and feel how that lightens me up, and then feel how that carries me into inspired action.
Yes.
And then when I can go from that practical action to recognizing, oh my gosh, all these core values, that's, like you said, the common cause, the thing that brings us together, the win-win solutions are right there available. And then when we can experience that yearning, that heart of the matter is actually a face of love within us, then we recognize the face of love within others. And then, we recognize the face of the creative desire to play And for me, that's my experience of consciousness, is that all of this vibrational dynamic, whatever you want to call it, God, spirit, ether, essence, prana, vril, chi, whatever you want to call it, it's this vibrational joy for play. And play takes all kinds of colors, all kinds of, I mean, you know, one person getting slapped is like ready for war, and another person getting slapped is like, ooh, nudge, nudge, you want to buy me dinner before you know, like it's play, right?
It becomes a
It becomes
celebration.
a celebration, including the darkness, because
Yeah.
even the darkness is part of that
Yes.
Ouroboros cycle, as you said, of the experimentation and finding out like, oh, I can find beauty and bliss and joy in a totally different color that some people will call dark, and I can find bliss and joy and play in a different color that some people would call light. And that's all part of the same cyclical movement of individuation and coming into self-expression and exploring and experimenting. And that's how we find the truth, right? We look at as much of the different variety and perspective as we can possibly find, and then make our choice. And we can choose to be miserable about everything that is. And sometimes that's exactly the perfect place to be and to cry and to vent and to just have it out, because that is the first step to being able to create something that we do want, is recognizing the contrast of what we don't, and then transforming it, transmuting it, alchemizing it to what we do want. Well, thank you, Chris.
So true.
Go ahead.
Yeah, this has been awesome. Well, I was just going to say that it is such a healthy process to go within, and even when you're experiencing something that's very sorrowful or upsetting, to feel it to its very bottom, to get through the anger into the hurt that's behind the anger, and to feel it to its very depths, to understand, okay, this is just another symptom of the lack of love in this world or within myself, and I know how to attend to that. There's always an answer, and it's as simple.
Yeah. I propose that it's all love. Even the lack of
Sorry,
love.
I just had a phone call coming through. Yeah.
Well, anyway, I so appreciate the banter with you, Chris, and I appreciate your kind of we have a lot of the similar desire to contribute to people's relief and clarity and giving them, you know, practical things that they can do that make a difference in day-to-day life. And ultimately, you know, if we subscribe to unity consciousness, we are all one. You know, we're all individually cells in the body of the whole. Or another way I like to think of it is like in the enormous ocean of all that is the universe and creation and time and everything, we might look at ourselves as individual whirlpools. And the more we can connect to the infinite interconnected waters, I think that is the new era for us. And I appreciate you being a part of that conversation with me. And thank you for whoever's listening to the podcast. Appreciate you joining us and sticking in there with us for the hour through some maybe familiar, maybe not familiar topics. For more of this, please follow ActualI.podcast and LIFTnibbles on Instagram and on Twitter. And I welcome you to join us for part 2. We're going to potentially talk more about covert control agendas and what it takes to expand our own felt sense of this kind of awakening inner divinity. What is that higher self? What are you talking about this, you know, inner infinite creative capacity? What is all that? So let's play more with that next time. And thank you, Chris.
I'm looking forward to it so much. Thank you, Maya, for inviting me to do this with you. This has been a great pleasure and a great honor. And I'm really hyped up and excited. You have such a beautiful way of breaking these things down to be comprehensible and also actionable. And that's really helpful for someone that like me that plays in a very creative, open world.
Yeah.
And so I'm excited myself to be engaging with you.
Thank you.
And very excited for anybody else that gets to tune into this and journey along with us.
Thank you.
So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Yay. Aw. Until next time then.
Until next
And hey,
time. Yeah. So we're going to do this next week on Wednesday once
yeah,
again.
let's talk offline. But yeah, same time, same station. Sounds good to me.
Sounds great. Look forward to it, guys.
And congratulations on your first podcast. Woohoo!
Heck yeah. Congrats there, Maya G. I love what you're doing here, and you just keep up the great work. And I'll be following along, and I look forward to engaging again.
Thank you, dear heart. All right, we'll talk offline.
All right.
Bye, everybody. Have a great week.
See you guys soon. Bye, everybody.